If you're like me at all, you probably get the impression that most people, we'll call them normies, they see government as a force for good. Even the people who complain about the current administration, whether it's today or whatever year you happen to be watching or listening to this, or sometime in the past, they can complain about the current people in office, but they still believe that government is there to do good. As long, and the caveat is, as long as it's run by people they support, the party they support, the individual that they want in the White House or the people in Congress. And then everything for them really kind of devolves, and I think devolves is probably a good word, into kind of a lifelong struggle to get the right people in power, to get the right person to nominate the right judges, to get the right people in Congress, it's set to pass the right laws, etc., etc. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, they get everything they get all these people in power, which never, first of all, happens. But let's say they do. When their team in charge, they get everything they want. They either repeal a bunch of stuff or get a bunch of stuff passed. And that doesn't happen either. But again, for the sake of argument, if you zoom out, these people are still missing the point. They're missing the big picture. Because in the very best situation possible, voting all the bums out, replacing them only with the people that you like, and having no opposition, and then relying on them to do what they actually promised to do in the first place, which almost always fails to happen as well. Even if you get all of those things that are just some kind of a unicorn, I guess, government is still extremely dangerous because it eventually, all the power that it has will end up in someone else's hands. Remember that a power to do something you like will always end up being in the hands of someone who wants to use that power in ways that you don't like in the future. And I think the best way to start this all out here is with a quote from Thomas Paine. Here from Common Sense, I think this is right at the top. Maybe it was paragraph 2. And here's how he put it. Society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. In its worst state, an intolerable one. And I know some of you will say, well, I don't know about that word necessary, but that's cool. Look at what Paine is saying here in 1776, lighting a fire under the revolutionaries before the Declaration of Independence. And we know how influential common sense was. And he's pointing out that human interaction is a blessing. Now, that doesn't mean you always agree with how that goes, the society part of it. But at best, government is still evil. Even in its best state, it's still evil because they still have power, and power is always liable to abuse. Mercy Otis Warren put it this way, and again, one word we can quibble with here, most. Well, I guess we can just remove the word most. She said most governments are the result of fraud or violence. And fraud or violence, they're all both pretty evil things. They're, even in its best state, maybe that's but a necessary evil to some people. Patrick Henry described it this way here in the Virginia Ratifying Convention. He said that government is no more than a choice among evils, has been a standing maxim for ages. So everyone understands that at best what you're getting is a choice of evil A versus evil B, evil red versus evil blue, however you want to divide it up between one or the other evil, or maybe there's multiple, maybe there's 3 or 4. This is Patrick Henry in the Virginia Ratifying Convention, June of 1788. And if we think about what Mercy Otis Warren had to say, most governments or governments are the result of fraud or violence. Maybe that's kind of what Patrick Henry's getting at here. Either you're going to get frauds or you're going to get a violent gang of thieves or something along those lines. And there is a reason why the founders, the old revolutionaries, recognize this. They kept saying these types of things over and over and over. And we don't hear this kind of thing, especially not from politicians, not from educators, and generally not from most political pundits, not from the mainstream news. There's always talking about how there's a problem and government needs to come in and fix it. Now, that doesn't mean that both sides of the kind of mainstream want government to fix the same problems. In various situations, they want government out and they just want government for their pet projects. But the ultimate result is people are still trusting government to do stuff. And they're not acknowledging that as soon as you give them power, someone is going to abuse it. We know that human beings, we're very flawed creatures. And we know the old phrase that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we live under the largest government in history. So it's not absolute power, but people with power in that empire in Washington, D.C., or in the Imperial Congress, they do have a lot of power, and it is a corrupting influence. I would argue that because there is so much power, only the corrupt people actually end up getting in office. And maybe once in a while, you have someone who isn't totally corrupt that gets there and they can't get anything done. But that's a side note. Samuel Adams put it this way. He said, power is intoxicating. Of course, this is one of my favorite puns of all time. He said, power is intoxicating, and men legally vested with it too often discover a disposition to make an ill use of it and an unwillingness to part with it. So this happens all through history. The founders, the old revolutionaries, didn't think it just happened with monarchs. They didn't just think it happened in Europe. They didn't just think it happened with France, for example, or the British. They recognized that power in and of itself is intoxicating. Power always seeks to expand, and power is a very dangerous creature, and that's why you always have to be on guard against it. But I'll get to that in just a moment as well. And of course, it's not just some governments, like I was saying. Here's how William Sims put it in the Massachusetts Ratifying Convention in 1788. He said, we know, and this is a pretty confident statement, we know that all governments have degenerated and consequently have abused the powers reposed in them. Can you imagine someone saying that today in some kind of a debate or a public forum or something like that? Anyone of respect would probably be immediately slammed for days, called out as a crazy conspiracy theorist or something like that. But if you read the ratification debates in Massachusetts, no one was saying like, okay, William, you're way off base here. You're totally wrong. You're dumb. You're a fool. What are you talking about? Even though he says, we know that all governments have degenerated and abused the powers that have been reposed in them. Also in that same day in Massachusetts, January 22nd, 1788, here's how Dr. Samuel Willard put it. He said, where power had been trusted to men, whether in great or small bodies, they had always abused it. And it doesn't matter if it's just an issue like, of course, Thomas Paine in Common Sense was railing against a hereditary monarchy. And some people say, well, as long as you have proper representation, everything will be cool. You've got checks and balances and all this stuff. But we're forgetting the ultimate check and balance, which is the people themselves. Again, I'll get to that in a moment. And here's Willard saying, look, every time people have power, it doesn't matter if it's a single person, a small group of people, or a huge representative body. They didn't have too many of those back then. They recognized that through history, the power had always been abused. I think Benjamin Franklin summed it up best. Here he is in the Philadelphia Convention, 1787. He said, as all history informs us, again, all history informs us, not just some of it, not just of the bad guys, but all through history. There has been in every state and kingdom a constant kind of warfare between the governing and the governed. And that's why I titled this episode, A War on Liberty, because government is, in essence, by its everything that it's doing. Now, let's say it was limited to the Constitution. It was only, we could have a different discussion at that point. But again, we're living under the largest government in history, and it keeps growing and growing and growing. And if this isn't obvious by now, Franklin, I think, really hammers it home by pointing out that it doesn't matter what state or kingdom. Government is always at odds with the people. And as a result, I think we end up with basically a legalized tyranny. Richard Henry Lee referred to it as an elective despotism. So did Thomas Jefferson. And here's how Jefferson put it elsewhere in a letter to Isaac Tiffany in 1819. I'm going to link to all this stuff in the show notes. I'll publish a blog post in a couple of hours after this live stream is done. It's going to be a short one today, but a couple hours after it's done over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. There, on each blog post for each episode, you're going to find all the different platforms we're on. Of course, we live stream on the big mainstream ones, YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and Twitch and LinkedIn. And we also live stream over at Rumble and Odyssey.com. I appreciate those of you who have kind of migrated over to those other platforms because I think they're less likely to be censorship heavy, we'll call it that way. And we also have all the podcast platforms where we put the audio only podcast edition out there as well. But I will also include links to all these original source documents that I'm citing in this episode. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. Here's Thomas Jefferson. This one's awesome. To Isaac Tiffany, 1819. He said, rightful liberty is unobstructed action according to our will, within the limits drawn around us by the equal rights of others. And to me, that's a great description of what liberty is. You are free to do what you choose to do as long as you do not violate the equal rights of another person. It's kind of a precursor to what some people would call the non-aggression principle today. He does go on. There's a caveat here, and I think this is really an important point. He said, I do not add within the limits of the law. Again, the limits drawn around us by the equal rights of others. And he very clearly points out that he did not use the term within the limits of the law, or the phrase, because law is often but the tyrant's will, and always so when it violates the rights of the individual. And of course, living under the largest government in history, that is probably a very good way to describe most of the stuff that's on the books today. So it's essential for people to stand up. People do nothing. What we face, because power always grows. Government is no better than a choice among evils. Those evils will keep getting worse and worse and worse, and the power will keep growing and growing and growing unless the people are firm in large numbers in support of liberty. And that's not where we're at today, and that's a big reason why things keep getting worse. Here's how John Adams put it. This is back when he was one of the good guys. Liberty must at all hazards be supported. That's not going to be easy in most situations. Again, when you're going up against the empire, the largest empire the world has ever seen, like they were at that time, like we are again today, it's not easy. And Jefferson told us that we can't expect to get from despotism to liberty in a feather bed. That doesn't mean it's always going to get into kind of rough stuff, but certainly people have to take some risks. It's not always going to be your lives, your fortunes, and your sacred honor. But it might be one of those three or two of those three, and sometimes all three of them. Here's how Jefferson put it. I would rather be exposed to the inconveniences attending too much liberty than those attending too small a degree of it. And I think in context, he's not saying that you can have too much freedom, but that's the argument. The more that people are free, the more that people freak out and want government to control them. Joseph Warren, this is a good one too. In a letter to Samuel Adams in 1774, he said, vigilance, activity, and patience are necessary at this time. And I think they're necessary for us today as well. You have to be vigilant. We have to take action, but we also have to be patient. If we expect some kind of silver bullet to turn things around in one cycle every couple of years, or one legislative act, or one amendment, one nullification movement, whatever it may be, one person running for office, that's not being patient, and that's not how we're going to get from where we are to a true land of the free. So vigilance, activity, and patience are necessary, but the mistress we court is liberty, and it is better to die than not to obtain her. Now, ultimately, it's up to the people to protect and defend their own constitution, their own liberty, whether the government happens to like it or not. And they certainly don't like it when people learn how to exercise their rights. As Jefferson put it, he said, a free people claim their rights as derived from the laws of nature and not as a gift of their chief magistrate. Here's a couple of good ones, juicy tidbits, I guess I can call them to close it out. Mercy Otis Warren said, the origin of all power is in the people, and they have an incontestable right to check the creatures of their own creation. Samuel Adams said it is the duty, not just a good idea, but it's the duty of everyone to use his utmost exertions in promoting the cause of liberty. And I think this is a perfect one to wrap it up for the week. Noah Webster, a people can never be deprived of their liberties while they retain in their own hands a power sufficient to any other power in the state. So as long as the people have as much strength as the government, the state, or any other power in the state, then they will always be free. And maybe I can get into more detail on that in another episode. If you like that concept, let me know. Of course, if you appreciate this kind of message and you want to help us get it out to more and more people, Absolutely nothing helps us roll up our sleeves every single day and take a stand for the Constitution and liberty more than the financial faith and support of our members. You can join us for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Don't feel obligated to do it, but if you got a couple of bucks of that dirty government fiat lying around, throw it our way. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. We will put it to good use for sure. Again, I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I hope you learned something. I hope you have a great weekend and hope to see you next week here on the Path to Liberty.